I remember the days in the old schoolyard. I think that's a Cat Stevens song, but he probably doesn't call himself Cat Stevens anymore. Quick recap on primary school. I covered some of it in a previous video. There were a rock in the back of the head from one of the older kids that didn't like me. There was these sets of swings, we called them boat swings. They had a bit of a four-legged frame. You'd fit, 4 or 6 people in. People would get in and do that, get the action going. And these 4 particular bullies in the year above me used to sit up on the corners and scheme, and then they'd chase you. And I wasn't the only one. There was 2 or 3 of us. Give you a bit of a touch-up. That'd be your punishment for the day, maybe, depending on what sort of mood they were in. Anyway, did my 7 years there till age 12, and then got sent to this shithole. The gates that used to be here, the road used to go through these gates, and they had been spray painted by either some locals or some internals with Haven for Thieves, and as much as the school tried to paint them out, clean them off, the outline of Haven for Thieves could still be seen. Rather profound that they had to replace the gates to remove the emblem. A bit of housekeeping. I've done this over a couple of sittings, and 3 actually now, I think. I note watching one back that with the beanie on inside out, and that there's a bit of red fluff here on the grey beard, bit of a contrast. I think that red fluff's come from this beanie that shares the beanie box with this beanie. Now, just to clarify, I'm definitely not looking for any sympathy. You become to think this is normal through your childhood with your parents, primary school and then secondary school, and I don't know where you realise that this probably needs to stop, but my memory is very vivid. These incidents are like putting a DVD in a DVD player and watching a movie. They're that vivid. Now, I choose not to mention any names except Steve, but he didn't do anything wrong, and at that time I didn't think anyone was doing anything wrong. I'm not looking for any sort of vindictive action or vindication, just telling a story. But I remember the name of every person involved in every incident that I've mentioned here. That doesn't mean that I'm looking to perpetrate some action on them or use their name for disrespectful purposes. It was what it was. You become what you become due to that being what it was across a number of years, and they probably thought it was normal behaviour as well. I think it was probably a lot worse in the years before us, and you'd have to hope that it got a lot better in the years after us. That's my take on it anyway. Certainly not looking for sympathy. How did we afford to send me to this shithole, you might ask? And it was a shithole. I hated this place. Well, I sat for a scholarship, maybe August of 1975, and I remember getting dropped off for that scholarship, and I thought, wow, I was just overwhelmed by the size of the place. Did the test, didn't find anything particularly confronting in the test, thought no more of it. In the 1975, huge storm did a lot of damage to the place. It did a bit of damage at our place too, and I remember watching that storm come from the southeast from our shed, so we got an extra week where we didn't have to go there. Grade 8s usually, kids in this case, boys turning 13 in that year, started a day before the rest of the school. Bit of familiarisation, or boarders in any case, and of course I was a boarder. 4 boarding houses, one for grade 8s, one for grade 9s, one for grade 11s, and grade 10s were on one floor of another boarding house and grade 12s on the top. That wild storm had done some significant damage to what was then the new dining room, where the whole school would be able to eat at once. But we're still on the first day, but we still had to eat in a couple of shifts in the old dining room. Table of 8, master in charge. I remember this is another really clear memory, and this was completely accidental. Someone's knocked the jug of water on the table over. The master said, this table here up to my classroom, and he named the classroom after school. So we dutifully headed up there, and he was rumbling around looking for the cane, and he couldn't find the cane, but he found a pearl cue. Day 1, things are starting well, and I thought, geez, this is going to be a long 5 years. My daughter's a teacher, and she really struggles to believe these stories. I can assure you, I'm not making them up. So I got that scholarship for 3 years, which they extended for the final 2 years. But I remember on the way to the place on my first day, we visited my grandparents, and my grandfather said that he would cover the costs if and when we couldn't. Don't know if he ever had to. Probably did. The next thing of prominent memory is the first walk right practice. Apparently it's important, I don't know why. One of the prefects at that, he had the spiky gelled up hair, he had the black beard or the black shadow, he had the school shorts. I split up the seams about 2 or 3 inches, basically a couple of sizes too small, and frayed, and the hair and the 5 o'clock shadow and the split shorts not sewn too tight and fraying were his symbolism of toughness. And he told us in no uncertain terms that with high voices like we had and the age we were at, we were scum. We would be scum for the next 4 years, which was and and wasn't true, depending on how good you were at sport. So what we'd entered was a system of condoned abuse. And I saw something on the news years ago where some teacher had said, not this school, but another big private operation had said, well, we've got systems in place where that doesn't happen. Let me tell you about the system in place at this place. So you had individual year groups, and in amongst them there was a pecking order established, the tougher kids and the not so tougher kids, day boys and boarders. At that time in school life, there was more boarders than day boys. Boarders and day boys hated each other for whatever reason. The senior year group thought they had protection. Some of them perpetrated some horrific, what today would be considered crimes against those younger than them. We'll get into a few of those surely. In that senior year group, that was where your dorm prefects and prefects came from. And particularly in grade 8, there was some horrific abuse. But it's not something I saw, it's something I was involved in. In a number of cases, some of the dorm masters, who weren't necessarily teachers at school, generally the housemaster would have been a teacher, and then he'd have a series of helpers. They may have been to the school, and they might have been studying off at the uni in town. Come along here, get pretty free food, pretty free accommodation. So they knew what was going on, and they just turned a blind eye. And in some cases, some of the teachers had been to the school, also knew what was going on, turned a blind eye. So you had these various levels and layers of the condoning of abuse. So one of the first things you learned was you'd head off to dinner, and you might have a big tin of Milo, which was something you added to your milk. The seniors had no dramas in if you were heading up with a big tin, they'd just take the lot. So you'd lose, I don't know how many teaspoons of Milo in a big tin, so you learn pretty quickly. Keep breaking that down into a small container, so you weren't going to lose the lot. Part of the first war cry practice was, you scum don't walk on grass. This is the first 15 oval, you never walk on this oval. This is the first 11 oval, you never walk on this oval unless you're told to. I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, what did we come here for? And back in those days, the age divisions were a little bit different. We had under 13s, grade 8s, under 14s, grade 9s, under 15s, grade 10s, under 16s, grade 11s, and then under 20s. So there were some men there, and they had general ages. Some kids had been kept back in primary school, and there was a smattering of kids in our year turning 14, and there was even one turning 15 in our grade 8 year that year. The National Under-20 shot put champion was one of the prefects, also first 15, first 11. So highly revered. One of his favourite tricks was coming up behind you and giving you a double-hander on the top of the head. Another fun thing they used to do was what's called a squirt test. So the first 11 would get named on assembly. And if you couldn't name the first 11, if you got pulled up outside by one of these seniors, that would mean there was some sort of punishment coming your way. But the most intense levels of punishment came from a particular dorm prefect in 1976. In our grade 8 year. He used to love cats and nine tails. He had several of them. He also used to love the big chemistry books and physics books on the top of the head. He also used to enjoy middle of winter, get you nude, and you'd be standing out in the yard with these books on your hands. And the minute your books dropped a little bit, you'd get whacked with a cat of nine tails, or a set square, or a ruler. Now I saw some poor bastards almost get broken. I could see them, not that I realised it at the time, but looking back, just becoming mentally more feeble. I used it to become far more stubborn and far more rebellious. Someone told me I didn't walk on that grass. I couldn't walk on that grass. I'd walk on that grass. And one of their favourite tricks was, go and pick that piece of rubbish up over there. Go and pick that up. Oh, you walked on the grass. Come see me tonight. And there's all the small shit going on. They'd call you over to their table and you'd have to go and get them a cup of tea or whatever in the dining room. Just all sorts of petty shit. So the teacher that was on duty that day when the jug of water was knocked over, he was a nasty son of a bitch. Didn't mind using the elbow, fist, some backhanders too, and at times unexpectedly. Rumour had it that he was ex-Brisbane Grammar School teacher, ex-Brisbane Grammar School student. Rumour also had it that he was suspended from Brisbane Rugby due to punching a referee. Always easy to get caught up in rumours. Don't have any verification of that, but that profile certainly fits the personality, reality, a rumour, and allegedly. But weirdly enough, probably the best teacher I had at that shithole. He taught Maths 1 and he taught it very well, but he was a violent, vicious son of a bitch. He wasn't the only one. Chemistry teacher, he could lay down the cane, but no one laid it down like the headmaster. And before I get into this, I didn't see anything sexual, not that I was looking for it. This is the closest it came to me. So I'd recently got 6 off the headmaster, and I'm pretty sure he was using a thicker cane that didn't whip, and he could put the 6, sometimes he gave you 8, 2 bonus, and he could put that on the same spot, and you bruised really deeply for quite a while. In grade 9, the housemaster up there, who was also English and French teacher, used to enjoy a few scotches after work, and he'd come in and watch a shower. Now, back in those days, I think there was 6 showers, 100 kids running through the showers, and he'd stand there and watch with these big glowing eyes. And he came and stood beside me one day, and he touched me on the arse, and he said, "Are they the ones you got from the headmaster?" And I just nodded, didn't think any more of it at the time. Another one of their favourite ones, up Harry Street here, there was a pine forest. And they'd send you in the middle of the night if they thought you'd done something wrong to count the trees in the pine forest. Just stupid shit like that. I was recently talking to a bloke that was in my year, and most stories you find will be like this, that people have shut out all the bad, and they'll tell me that, "Oh, I love the place, never did anything to me." This particular bloke had a brother who was a mean son of a bitch as well, who was in the first 11, so you're automatically protected. And as you go through the years, by the time you get to one, either being in one of those sports teams, rugby union, first 15, cricket, first 11, and anything athletics was considered, you became a protected species. I wasn't too good at sport. I thought I wouldn't mind being part of the first 15, and eventually did become part of the first 15, but I don't know how. But certainly, looking back, there's no way in the world I should have been in that side. There's one guy in particular that should have had my spot, and he did get it for most of the season when I broke my collarbone. So some sort of justice, I guess. We would have been the worst first 15 in the history of GPS schools. We won 2 games that year, and both of them were against Downlands. We set a record at the time against Gregory Terrace, and that side included Michael Liner, Damien Frawley, who went on to become, and possibly still is, the head honcho of QIC, Queensland Investment Corporation, a number of Reds, Wallabies, and NRL players, and they beat us 64-0 in the days of 4-point tries. And Michael Liner had a really bad day with the boot. I think he only got 3 or 4 out of 14 or 15. So Downlands not and never have been part of the GPS competition. We played them once at the start of the season as a trial game, and then in the annual O'Callaghan Cup clash later in the year on the bye. There's 9 GPS schools, so everyone runs through a bye. Although I do feel sorry for one particular guy who's one of the best sportsmen I've ever seen. Now dead, died in 2012 in a car accident. I'll talk a bit more about him later. So you became a protected species when you made these sides. Probably a little bit more protected as you got older. This particular prefect from a grade 8 year, many years later, when I was playing football rugby union at the local club in town, or one of the local clubs in town, we called ourselves the Institute back then. It was the Darling Downs Institute of Advanced Education. So this guy had gone on to play for them and become friends with some of the people that were still in the club or playing for the club when I started. And when the year he turned 36, he died in a car accident. He was from North Queensland, and I politely declined the invitation to go to the funeral or participate in any celebratory times of his life. I did dislike that son of a bitch. I wouldn't have wished death on him. I don't wish death on anybody. This was the moment, looking back, that I realised I had no feelings at all. None at all. It wasn't good he's dead, or it wasn't, gee, I feel sorry for that bloke, but no feelings at all. So I don't know, does that make me a sociopath, or someone somewhere would have a name for it? His abuse was pretty constant and pretty heavy, and today I'd consider it illegal. So what does this place tell me? In the early years, I learnt that pain didn't hurt. Now, right here I'm learning, or through these school years, I'm learning that psychological pain in my particular case, or just how strong the mind is, and that you can take yourself to a place of being reasonably emotionless. Now, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Circumstances can drive you to these places, but I really did feel sorry for a number of guys, particularly some of the intellectuals at this place. They were folding up, and I could see them withering right into themselves. I guess I withered right into myself as well, but I was pretty comfortable. I just needed to get through those years, get to the stage of being in the first 15 and see that hypocrisy unfold and get out of the shithole and make the next mistake in my life and go home to a failing enterprise. I guess I was pretty lucky in that I was reasonably intellectual, but funnily enough, I don't think mature enough. Once I got to grade 11 and 12, I got really good marks for some subjects, chemistry, maths, English, French, and reasonable marks for physics and maths too, but just looking back, feel I wasn't mature enough to understand the concepts behind the maths, if you can understand that, at least as much as I do today. Today, things like physics and the mathematics of mathematics 2 concepts are pretty important, and I call on them pretty regularly. And I'm sure a lot of people do, they just don't realise it. Mathematics 1, calculus, statistics and probability, and those types of things, I breezed through those. Chemistry, loved it, breezed through that. English was not a drama. I would have liked to have done economics, even back then, possibly accounting, and it became something else when you got to senior. But you were very much pushed. Well, this guy's getting this for maths and this for English and this, he needs to do this course, this academic line. So that academic line was, in senior I ended up doing English, everyone did English, maths 1, maths 2, chemistry, physics and French, and that was it. And if I'd have branched out and forced the issue of trying to choose economics, you probably would have also had to drop physics. I think there's much more choice today in any case. In these later years, last 10 or 15 years, I've gone back and revisited the physics and the maths 2 and things like that. Just the other day, I worked through a bit of trigonometry. It was very beneficial to what I was doing. One of the fun things to do was something that would have got you expelled immediately, and I don't know what the penalties are today, but we used to sneak out fairly often. One of the memorable times was when we went to watch the Toowoomba rugby league side, would be known today as the Clydesdales, take on the Great Britain touring rugby league side. Tough guys back in those days. The Toowoomba side beat them, but on the way back, someone had shifted our clothes out of the tree we hid them in. So I don't know why we didn't get expelled, but there's a bit more music to face for that. And that was in 1979. Another part of the bullying and fighting, other schools hated this place in Toowoomba Grammar. I do recall one Friday afternoon we could go downtown on a Friday, stopping for a rest as we walked back up the hill in Queen's Park, had one of the benches there, getting the living daylights flogged out of us by some kids from one of the other high schools in town. These kids were somewhat older than us, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. There were 2 of us and 6 of them. I remember that vividly. Perhaps some early gang violence. So lots of moving parts to the bullying and violence. It was my under 14 football year, and for some reason I was in the 14As. Looking back, never good enough. And there was a bloke that was constantly at me. And I guess I was always scared to lose my shit, but this particular day I lost my shit. And I need him in the Jats crackers, and he went down like a Polex bullock actually. When I came over the top and gave him some elbow work around the head, I just lost my shit. Another one of those realisations, we had a lot of blokes doing boxing, fighting by the Queensbury rules. I've had very few fights in my life, I steer away from it. But the realisation then was that the best way to fight is to fight for survival with no thought for rules. Today things have changed pretty markedly. Folks carrying knives and all sorts of shit. Never saw that back then, whether we were lucky or I don't know. But that was probably the first time I lost my shit. And I thought, wow, I'm going to be in for this here now. But it never happened. The guy never came near me again, just left me alone. And I guess standing up to these guys and giving them a bit of a beating makes some sort of a statement. At one of the stages, when I was in some trouble, I don't know whether it was when I caught smoking or caught leaving the school. I'm surprised I didn't get expelled for that. And my mother told me that I was no good and I was never going to be any good. So that was pretty motivating coming from your mother. My grandmother also said that every cloud has a silver lining. Mine just hadn't been found yet. Clearly making great impressions on my parents. And then in another breath, you'd hear my mother say, oh, he's really good at football. He knows how to read a game. I don't know how she knew that. They never came to watch. And that's understandable with animals to feed and work to do. But she wouldn't have understood the game anyway, and she was just completely wrong. I wasn't a good footballer at all. Later in life, I became a much better coach than I ever was a player, and I certainly wasn't a great coach, more an organiser, but certainly a couple of steps up from my abilities as a player. This guy on the mower here seemed to follow me around when I was doing this little bit of filming. I never entered their site, and if I did, would have got some close-ups of buildings, but I could do that on a weekend in the pretense that I was watching sport. Everywhere I turned up, he turned up, just driving around on his mower. Back in these days, the boarders were mainly from pastoral families, agricultural families. One of the guys brought in 5 or 6 high-powered weapons, just had them in his cupboard, shot the senior master's cat out the window one Sunday afternoon. I often wonder what happened to this guy. He was demonstrating tendencies that may have led to him becoming a career criminal, but I haven't seen him pop up in any court actions, so I assume he's just gone home to become a pastoralist. In my senior year, my old man raised his head again. When you got to senior, well, you're supposed to get a cubicle all to yourself, whereas all the other years were shared or just full open rooms. Of course, my senior year happened to have more kids than rooms, so there was another room set up. I think there were 4 beds in it, and I just happened to get one of them, which was fine, but for some reason wasn't fine for the old man. So he went and found the housemaster and started a screaming match in the hallway with him, and then started pushing him around. I thought, oh, Jesus, just go home, mate. It doesn't really matter. Well, the housemaster of our senior year used to love giving out what was known as late prep. So you'd do your late prep on a Friday night, and you'd be expected to have something to study all night. You might get to bed at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. That was the punishment. You'd move out of where you were normally studying and down into a place called the day room. I had a significant banking up of late night prep hours, as did many others. And I think I'd still be doing late prep today if I was still there. But we didn't have to do it when we were in the first 15 or first 11, first 4, first 5 for basketball. So I had a pretty significant bank of late prep. But the good thing about it was someone had to stay up to supposedly supervise you. And of course they didn't. We'd end up playing cricket in the hallways. Lots of other buildings since I was there. I've got no doubt there's probably a less percentage of boarders today than back in those days. More day boys. Junior schools come along. I cut the pine forest down and put the junior school in. I see there's some sort of a engineering and technical school about to be built right up here on the corner of Mackenzie and Harry's. An influencing factor on me was, I can't remember if we were in grade 9 or grade 11, but the school got a computer. So 1977 or 1979. And I do remember it was a Wang and it had the old proper floppy disks. One computer amongst however many were doing that maths discipline. We had to do an assignment on it or an assignment with it. We were right up with stuff to, generation of random numbers. But I found that fascinating. It started a lifelong love of technology, not in the sense of where we're at with mobile phones and things today, but certainly what you can do with them, but more from an automation front. And that became very important later in my life. That was fun. I've probably still got a floppy disk or 2 floating around here somewhere, and you'd have the old computer should be logged. Everyone would have an hour session, be going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so that everyone could get through and get their work done. I imagine today everyone's got a laptop and there's just computers everywhere. Sport, saw some amazing athletes at this place and other schools, of course. First guy I remember was in the first 11 cricket in grade 9, and he was built like a 20-year-old then. It turns out he'd been in the first 11 in grade 8 as well, so 5 years in the first 11 for him. He also played in the first 15 rugby union against up to 20-year-olds in grade 9. He's also dead, poor bastard. He was a copper up in Gympie and died in his mid-50s. But the one in particular that I remember in our year, now the school purchased him or gave him a scholarship from another school in town. I think he still holds a couple of records there. This guy was a phenomenon. He came to the school in grade 10 as a 15-year-old. He had a big fro. He could have shaved twice a day then. He would have been 6'4", 6'5". Probably in grade 10 was 95 kilos by the time he'd finished. He'd have been 100, 105, do everything. So highly accomplished athlete, shot put, sprinting, middle distance, high jump, long jump, just incredible. Rumour has it he was playing A-grade rugby league at 15 and had offers to go to Sydney. And one of the great life lessons from this guy was he did it his way. He did it his way right till his death. He played in the first 15 rugby union in his first year, grade 10, so up against 20-year-olds. I played him in the second row that year, and his vertical jump was phenomenal. And I wasn't someone to approach him, but he said to me one day, "Just I'm not playing second row again, too hard," or lock they call it today. So he went on to play inside centre, or a second 5/8 if you're a Kiwi, and was just phenomenal, almost unstoppable. It's a terrible shame that the rest of the side in my particular year was so bad around him. And there was probably 6 or 7 of us that shouldn't have been there, me being one in particular. But another story about this guy, so up here on this top oval, the oval was of a different structure. There was 2 ovals with 2 cricket pitches. This guy should have also been in the first 11 cricket, but he didn't want to stand out in the sun all day. He and a couple of others that didn't want to stand out in the sun all day, first 11 played all day, decided for a bit of sport they'd play in the fourth 11, probably a 3.5 hour game. So they'd score 300, 350 in their 30 overs, our side. Then of course they'd go on and bowl the other side out for 50, 100, generally very low scores. And up here's the hospital, and now that's the hospital up there, and of course the street and the cars. They're only small ovals. Down over the edge of the fence over those buildings was what was known as a quadrangle. There'd be kids stationed everywhere when this guy got going, batting, including in the front of the hospital, down in the quadrangle, returning the balls, because he'd just flog them everywhere. Cars in the street here in front of the hospital, everything in danger. So they were at him for ages and ages to go down and have a hit. He could bowl 2s quick, try out for the first 11, and he resisted and he resisted. And eventually, about halfway through the season, he went down. Word got around the school pretty quickly. All practice was cancelled that afternoon because they knew everyone was going to go and watch this anyway. So they lined up the bowlers from the first 11, and he just flogged the living daylights out of them. And again, those kids moved to all areas of the street. First 11 oval was down on what was known as Mills Oval, so over into Mary Street. He gave them a touch up for 45 minutes or so, declined to take the ball and do some bowling, and went home. Which reminds me, after our first 15 year, we had a party at a place out in one of the fathers owned out in Taylor Street in his garage. We all turned up timidly with our six-packs and things like that. This guy, let's call him Steve, because that was his name, turned up on his brother's Kawasaki 1100 with a carton strapped to the back and came in, had a few beers and headed off on a Kawasaki 1100. He was just that far in maturity stakes above the rest of us. Well, he had three brothers actually. First brother was in senior in 76, our first year, in the first 15. Built like this guy. Second guy was much slimmer but also quite a good athlete. And I never got to meet the fourth of them, and his third brother, who was much younger, started after we'd finished. A phenomenal human being, and unfortunately died in a car accident. He played for the Australian under-21s in rugby union, but it just didn't interest him. He headed off with the love of his life overseas. They were both teachers, and I understand really good teachers. Playing footy and teaching through Europe and England. I believe he had a dual passport. He came back, taught for a little while, didn't like it. He became a home lawn and small sports field irrigation specialist, and he just went about life his way. The Horans and the Littles were revered in the late 80s and early 90s as being so young and playing first grade footy and making the rep teams, the Queensland Reds and the Wallabies. And don't get me wrong, they were exceptional footballers, but they weren't great growers of whiskers. This guy, Steve, he looked like he was 35 when he left school. He would have been shaven twice a day then. So he went straight to Brisbane, straight into first grade, but nobody noticed. Nobody must have checked his age. He did come and play a couple of seasons for the footy club I was playing for. Might have become the Uni of Southern Queensland by then. Again, he was phenomenal. He sorted some blokes out that thought they were tough from other clubs. One of the great stories is there was a 19-year-old that played for Dalby, another club, and he was elevated to A grade this particular day. And he said he went to the coach and said, I can't do that. This bloke's playing, he's huge. And he said as he was talking to this coach, he saw this guy getting out of a Suzuki, what today would be known as a Suzuki Jimny. And he said this huge man just unfolds himself out of this really tiny car. And that was this guy. He was just a phenomenal human being. Not a nasty bone in his body. He was just good at what he did. Really, really good at what he did. Quiet, unassuming, and pretty carefree. And his great lesson in life is just did it my way. Just did it my way. He'd just turn up, play, go home. No small talk, no big noting, no partying afterwards. Still just doing it his way. He didn't feel any peer pressure to do anything in any of those areas. For anybody that knows, Jason Little also went to this particular school. Another phenomenal athlete while we're talking sports. Great at cricket, great at rugby union. He would have been good at rugby league. Phenomenally huge athlete, just like the guy I've just described. And there's a story when Jason was playing in the first 11 cricket at this school. Got selected for A side and they played England. He went out and gave them a fair touch up. This side that Jason tapped about the field, and that was in a Queensland Country men's team, included he in both. And of course, for those that follow along, Jason has become a really successful businessman in Sydney. Not too bad for the son of a Jimbo pig farmer. And see, guys that are really good at sport like that, they would have missed any of the bullying, any of the abuse because of their sporting prowess. Sporting prowess certainly rated above intellectual prowess at this place. So this Barber Oval down here was where the 15A cricket team played. First 15 played there during 1976 due to significant damage to Old Boys Oval, and obviously now Old Boys Oval has a cricket pitch in it, which was sacrilege. Would never have happened all those years ago. And because first 11 played on Mills Oval, which is down on Mary Street. 1979, the school, through its athletics coach, guy by the name of Lindsay Jones, who was a heavy-duty local Labor Party agitator, but the man could speak. He decided that we were going to break 8 minutes, break the record for the GPS Athletics for the 4x800 metre relay. He got up on stage and he had that lectern, moving it around, gave one of the most motivating speeches I could remember. And of course we had a number of pretty good 800 metre runners, and they went out, and I think they did a 7:52. I don't know what the record is today, but that was one of the big moments that I remember well. I kid you not, this school actually had a blind man as coach of the first 11. I often wondered how he never got hit because he couldn't see very well. He'd turn up to training or practice with his guide dog and stand at the end of the pitch where an umpire would stand with balls flying around. Quite dangerous for him. So yeah, I remember the days of the old schoolyard, and I remember a lot of it quite vividly. Not that we were in any position to afford it at the time, but I wouldn't have sent the fleas of my son's dogs to this place. And we were lucky. We ended up, through some chance actually, that all of the kids attended a most excellent secondary school, and we were lucky to coincide with a headmaster that was exceptional at his job as a teacher and a motivator. It was one of the lucky parts of our life. There's lots of other stories about this place and the psychology that was prevalent in my time there. Maybe I'll tell them, maybe I won't. We'll see how we go. They're not relevant to what I've been talking about here, but certainly relevant to life and life outcomes.